Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Doug Landis, growth partner at Emergence Capital. The topic of today's episode is a venture capitalist view of presales. And today, Doug and I are going to dig into his view of the world on presales. Doug and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago about the elevation and the importance of the role of presales and go-to-market, and talked about the tools that are growing up in this space before our eyes. And so in today's episode, Doug and I are going to discuss his perspective on why now is the time, where this role can go in the future, and the tools and the products that are being created for presales professionals. Enjoy. Today's episode is sponsored by Consensus. Scale your presales organization with interactive video demos. Experience an interactive demo at goconsensus.com. Doug Landis, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How's it going today?
What's up, James? It's going great, man. I'm excited. I'm excited about this topic that we're about to dig into. It's very top of mind.
I'm excited as well because you and I met a couple of weeks ago just to preface podcast. And I felt like we should have recorded that episode because it was just full of good stuff about presales. And I can't wait to pick your brain on the actual episode today. So I'm really excited to dig in, and I'm so glad to have you on here. You know, you're actually our first venture capitalist on the podcast. So the community is introduced to a new persona. So we're definitely looking forward to it.
You know, it's funny you say that because I even saw that in the brief at a time when I'm like, ooh, the presales from a VC point of view. I mean, here's the crazy thing is I'm not a traditional VC. I'm not a traditional venture capitalist. I'm an operator at heart, at the core, at the root of me. I love building businesses and building companies. And the weird thing is I'm like a sales professional wrapped up in a marketer's body. So I'm like this weird kind of go-to-market unicorn that also has a maniacal love and appreciation and support for pre-sales, for sales enablement, for RevOps. I love it all. If it's go-to-market oriented, I love it all.
Doug, you are the perfect guest to have on the podcast today. So let's talk about that love a little bit. Before we get into pre-sales, you've got a good extensive background at some big companies, running sales teams, sales productivity, and even a title of chief storyteller. So tell us a little bit about your background, Doug.
You know, as I mentioned, I'm a sales professional wrapped in a marketer's body. I mean, look, I've been selling my whole life. And for all of you out there in the world of pre-sales, or even if you're not in pre-sales, you're in sales. So we all are in sales at the end of the day. And so you might want to get really good at that profession because we all got to do it to some degree. But no, for me, it started selling newspapers and delivering newspapers as a little tiny kid. And it just kind of evolved naturally. It's interesting. I was just telling earlier a group of folks that I used to work for Black & Decker right out of college. And it was great because they gave me incredible training and a company car and an expense account and a bunch of power tools. And I sold all their accessories like saw blades, drill bits, screwdriver bits, et cetera. It's like software to hardware. And I covered from Canada to Mexico. I lived in Denver, Colorado. And the interesting thing that I had to do was I was literally doing drive-by sales to hardware stores. We drive by oh, there's a hardware store, and look up my list. And this is old school days when we had pen and paper and no cell phones. And I would pull into the parking lot, and immediately at that moment in time, I start assessing the business. Is the parking lot full? Is it empty? What's it full of? Are there trucks? Are there contractors there? I walk into the store and immediately I'm assessing what's going on in the business. I'm thinking about where their competitors might be located. And it's interesting, this is a long time ago, like I said, pre-cell phones. And it's that skill set, I think, is so crucial. And in fact, it was something that I've been talking to some of our portfolio companies about recently, is this notion of being able to assess a business and truly understand it in a matter of minutes. So I was at Black & Decker for a long time, and then I'm from the Bay Area, so I moved back to go work at Oracle, pounding the phones, making 100 dials a day as SDR. It's funny, I was out in the field selling at Black & Decker and went to Oracle as an SDR because they're like, you don't have industry experience. But some of my best friends in the world were from those days as an SDR there, so I don't hate it at all. I think it's a super valuable experience for everybody, as difficult as it can be. It's interesting, when I was at Oracle, I left to go start a technology company, a .com, before the big dot fall apart. And then at that point, we started it, raised a bunch of money, and then of course it collapsed like everybody else's. And then I went through this process of what am I doing with my life? I thought this was going to be for the rest of my life as a CEO of a startup or of a bigger software company. And at that point, that's when I decided to kind of make this transition. What I think about more is about the world of revenue acceleration. It's gone through all sorts of iterations of training and enablement. And at the end of the day, it's really about how do we accelerate the performance of anybody that is customer facing. It expands way beyond content. It's more metrics driven and metrics oriented. So I was fortunate enough to land at Salesforce in the early days, spent, 5 years there. When I left, there was 26,000 people. When I got there was about 1,000 or just under. And then from there, I went to Box. And it was at Box that I learned something that I had actually learned at Salesforce, but I noticed it much more so when I was at Box, was this notion of how we tell the Box story. And this is where the role of chief storyteller came out, because what I found was, one, most of us are natural born storytellers, but we're terrible at telling stories at work. When it comes to our work products, we get in features and functions and competitive shit and pricing and packaging, excuse my French. And two, our customer stories are actually aligned terribly because it's got like problem, solution, ROI, and that's what you're supposed to regurgitate, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So there was two pieces that were missing. There was like understanding kind of the story mechanics on how to actually tell a great story, and then actually practicing it and getting good at being more consciously aware of when and how to tell the right stories to the right audience. What I noticed at Box, we hired a new CRO. We took him around to meet a bunch of the reps. And he was like, "Oh, so tell me, how do you position Box?" And we got 26 different stories. And he looked at me, he's like, "We have a consistency problem." And that was when the light bulb went on. I was like, "We got to fix this." And so I created that role. I reported to Aaron, and the rest is history.
That's pretty awesome, Doug. I love your background. I love the experience, and the concept of the chief storyteller and having that true experience is a problem that we all see too many times within our companies. The inconsistency and the inability to articulate the value to the customers on what product actually does. It's still a problem that companies face today. It's really unbelievable.
Here's the interesting thing. So for all of you out there who are in the world of pre-sales, you, by the way, need to become better storytellers as well, because I can't tell you how many people do a terrible job in a demo. It's like, here's a kicker for a demo. Give me the point of view that I'm seeing the demo through. Make sure you share that point of view, because often, and this is largely probably more done so from AEs than it is from our pre-sales brothers and sisters, because y'all are experts. But I can't tell you how many times I just see clicks and I'm like, oh, you click here and you click here and you click here. And it's like slides. You never call out the fact that it's a slide because it's there to support you. Same thing with the demo. Like, tell me a story, build a narrative, and make sure there's a point of view in that narrative. Make sure you're really clear about who the characters are and what journey they're going through. Super, super important. Can't stress that enough.
Absolutely, Doug. And I appreciate that perspective, because when someone just goes and features and clicks around, it's not inspiring. And I think some of the best pre-sales professionals, they sell art of the possible. They can allow you to put yourself in that shoes, how this software, this product's going to make my life better. And that light bulb moment goes off, and you know that you're going to move forward on that prospect. That's what it's about. And I think that's what pre-sales people are so good at. And we probably wish our AE counterparts were, but that's okay. That's a story for another day.
I mean, look, everyone's got room for improvement, and James, to your point, the word that comes to mind when you were just talking about like the art of the possible is the word imagine, right? It's the most powerful word. Like, imagine if your world was like this. Who can't get wrapped up in that? I mean, it's what we do when we go to the movies. We're like, popcorn in hand, I'm imagining, baby, take me on that journey.
I already love where we're going. So the title of today's episode is A Venture Capitalist View of Pre-Sales. And you've given us the background. We know that you've been in sales productivity, revenue acceleration. And so I just want to start off with the bat, say, Doug, I want to know what your view is on pre-sales professionals' importance in the go-to-market organization. We're starting there.
Oof. We're coming out of the gate swinging right away. I love it. Here's the thing. I just literally got off a call with a handful of pre-sales engineers from Chorus, one of our portfolio companies. And I started off with the call was like, I think you guys are the sleeping giant killers. I think the world of pre-sales, we as sellers, AEs, would be next to nothing without you. And I say next to nothing because there are a lot of brilliant AEs who, by the way, have kind of pre-sales DNA already in them. They're the ultimate AE because they can be both, because they're really technical, but also can run a great process. But at the end of the day, like, I think this is the year of pre-sales. And part of the reason why I say that is because if you think about 5 years ago, it was kind of like sales enablement had its day in the sunlight. And then a few years ago, it was RevOps, and everyone's all talking about RevOps. And they all still matter, but now everyone is focused on pre-sales because you all deliver so much value in the process and the experience and the sense of knowledge that you have in terms of the value that you can deliver as a solution and as a company is so deep. I feel like it's largely untapped. And it kind of drives me bananas. So I'm all about you in pre-sales.
I love that response. So let me just go off what you just mentioned. Why has this been untapped? Why are we still having the same conversations about sales engineering today that we were 5, 10, even 15 years ago?
Well, at the risk of pissing off some of you that are on this podcast, I mean, I think largely people considered pre-sales as like a bunch of technical nerds that were kind of sat behind the curtain, so to speak, and behind the scenes. And maybe to some degree, they didn't want to be front and center and be the quarterbacks, if you will, back then. And I think now the relationship between AE and pre-sales is so even that pre-sales engineers, they're just more technically oriented account executive, honestly. And so I feel like pre-sales as a function is getting more attention because the impact they're having on the business. And I think pre-sales engineers as people who are really technical, but still can be in front of an audience and be comfortable and confident and also be a nerd at the same time has also grown. That's part of the reason why they're flourishing and having their time in the spotlight right now.
I love that perspective, Doug. And I'm very proud that I put out a LinkedIn post on like January 2nd saying that 2021 was going to be the year of the pre-sales professional. We're going for it, right? This is what PreSales Collective is here for. I agree with you on like the technical, nerdy side of things. And I think that this role has been traditionally looked at as a sales support role. And the evolution is it is a true sales co-pilot. What do you think about that?
I fully agree with that. I think the challenge is when RevOps had its kind of time in the spotlight, I saw a RevOps leader as the co-founder of the sales organization. Largely it's like, because of all the data and the insights, et cetera. But if you unpack that even more, the SVP or VP of sales or CRO, what have you, there are other co-pilot or co-founder, if you will, and it's okay to have 3 founders. We see it all the time in the world of venture, should be the head of pre-sales. I mean, there's the process piece, right? Which the sellers are taking or managing and owning. And then there's the technical piece, which needs to be managed and owned. And it's equally as important. And I think that's one of the distinctions here is there used to be a hierarchy of importance, where it was like the process and the AE leading the process. It's almost like the quarterback of the football team is more important and more valuable than RevOps or pre-sales or even customer success. And I feel like today there's much more autonomy. It's much more even. We're in an even playing field. If you think about like Tom Brady, when he was at the Patriots, he was actually not the number 1 highest paid player on the team. You know who was? His offensive lineman, because they were there to protect him. If he's not protected, he can't throw the ball and win the Super Bowl.
So, Doug, why do you think that the SE is finally getting its importance in the sales cycle? Is it because of access to information? Is it the day of the informed buyer? Is it because SaaS solutions have churn now and you actually have to do more than just sell it and forget it? Do you think that there's like more rationale here why as like the level of importance has kind of shifted?
Yes to all of those, by the way. So thank you for teeing those up because I would every statement I'm like, yep, exactly. All the above. And I think it's also due to the fact that the other support functions across the sales organization are also getting elevated, right? We talked about, the world of enablement and RevOps and now pre-sales and customer success. Clearly, 10 years ago, they now have a seat at the table. There is a need and a desire to eliminate that hierarchy that we were just talking about. You're absolutely right. SaaS applications, while easy on the front end, require a tremendous amount of work on the back end to make sure there's integration, adoption, the data flow is actually happening. So there's a lot of technical meat behind, the sexy front end push button screens. And the truth is like that is no longer got to make sure it works. Like, got to make sure that it fits to the technical capabilities. It's equally as valuable and important. And to be honest, it's also because groups like the PreSales Collective exist. I think there happens to be a window of opportunity to elevate this role. And so it's got groundswell.
I want to put you on the hot seat here. Does this mean that the role of the account executive or sales rep is diminishing?
No. So I would argue you don't have to diminish one to elevate the other. I believe that you just elevate the others to make equal. Look, we're in the world right now of DE and I. This is what we care about right now. So guess what? Let's start treating everybody equally. Now, here's the thing, though. As an AE, you're on the hot seat for a heck of a lot more than what a pre-sales engineer is on the hot seat for. So we can't discount that. That doesn't mean that they're more important or more valuable. It's a choice. I'm choosing as the AE that I'm going to be the quarterback and I'm going to take the hits when things don't work, when we made all these promises and we are not delivering on them. Someone has to be accountable and responsible for that. And I think that's where the separation starts to happen. But it doesn't mean that we can't all be equal in terms of comp, in terms of acknowledgement and support.
I'm actually really happy that you brought up comp, because that's one of the things that I'm curious to get your perspective on is for this role to really get its seat at the executive table, and something that I continue to say, the strategic seat at the executive table. Does the comp structure need to change? Do pre-sales professionals need to be on quota like account executives and compensated the same way?
Why not? Here's the thing. I think for me, and many of you listening to this have probably experienced this or have felt something similar, but I can't tell you over the years how many kickoffs I'm at, and they're bringing up this AE and they're celebrating the AE and they're giving them all sorts of prizes like a watch or stock options or a massive check. And one of the things that I saw over time, though, was the acknowledgement of everybody else that kind of supported in the deal. But I didn't see enough of the parity between like the AE and the pre-sales engineer. Now, great AEs always know that you've got to have a solid wingman, right? And that's part of what made them wildly successful, is knowing that, hey, listen, my SDR is a rock star. They helped to uncover a bunch of opportunities. My sales engineer helped to make sure that technically we're sound. And our CSM helped to drive adoption and implementation to drive the upsell that was now this multi-million-dollar deal that we're all celebrating. So when we recognize that everyone is equally as important, then we start to look at, well, is the comp structure appropriate? Because if I'm a pre-sales engineer and I'm supporting, let's say I'm supporting 2 AEs and you've got 2 huge deals on the table, they're going to put you well over your number. And now you're in accelerators. You're going to make, 7 figures potentially. Where's my piece of that? Now, the challenge is, and I'm actually really curious your thoughts on this. I'm going to throw you a question back. The challenge is how do you compensate or value the amount of work that goes in from a pre-sales engineer into a deal? And I think that's one of the big challenges, right? So let's say we're working on a $1 million deal. $1 million deal is going to take us 12 months to get done. We'll probably like 500 interactions between me, the AE, and that company. In that deal, how many interactions will the pre-sales person have? How much work are they going to put into all of the different level of conversations? Now, in some cases, when it's a really technical product, I would argue that it's 50-50. Pre-sales is involved at an equal amount. But often in a lot of companies, I feel like the amount of engagement and participation is actually maybe 70-30 to AE to pre-sales. So then I think the key to making compensation, feel more fair is understanding the amount of effort and impact that the pre-sales folks are actually having on the deals. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. And I think that's what's so interesting from my perspective is these are the types of conversations I'm having with different companies. There are some people who are like, we would never put our SEs on quota. And there are some companies that are like, yes, we're going to put our SEs on quota and compensate them well and according to the sales and territories that they support. When you have SEs and you're not in a 1-to-1 ratio and you're in a 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, 1-to-5, you want to be able to support across those teams, but it's hard to do. I do think that many times when you're supporting multiple AEs, you do have that beauty and vantage point to be impactful in and out of the deal cycle, depending on what's happening. And you can make a very big impact. But a lot of times with SEs, we're naturally collaborative. So you might need some coverage. You might need some help. And so one of your other SEs or an overlay team will come in and support. And what I have found is SEs tend to be like, yeah, no problem, I'll help. When you're on a quota, you might say, well, what's my split? What's my percentage? And it kind of kills that collaborative world.
Unfortunately, it's true. It's exactly what it does. And when you're on base plus bonus or variable, whatever it may be, it's almost like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do this. Or people will step in for one another. So it does beg the question of like, well, does that mean we should just look overall at comp structure across the board, across all go-to-market teams? And I think there's some validity to it. By the way, I'm going to go back to another part of your question about like why now for the pre-sales engineer. I also want to talk about the notion that I fundamentally believe the greatest go-to-market motion that's going to transpire, it's already starting right now over the next 5 to 10 years, is going to be product-led growth. We're leading with the product first. People are getting into the product first because they want to feel like they want to taste and feel the product right away, and they want to start getting value out of the product. Well, guess what? That just means the value of the people who understand the product technically more so is greater. right? I think that's another catalyst for why the world of pre-sales is actually getting a lot more attention.
I'm really happy you brought that up, Doug, because to your point about the 70-30, 50-50, sometimes in product-led motion, the SE is doing much more of the work. That 70-30 might be on the SE, right?
Totally. It's now 90-10 largely. You could potentially argue that. And honestly, if you're a pure product-led growth company, I guess there's two questions you have to ask. One is like, what is the role of the pre-sales engineer and how has that shifted? Because I'll tell you what, the role of the SDR is very different if you're product-led growth. And then also division between the roles is actually pretty different in that kind of domain. So it does force you to shift to think about kind of comp plan and structure and responsibility differently.
It's a very worthwhile thing to keep a pulse on. Even for the Pre-Sales Leadership Collective, we held our symposium recently and we brought Todd Olson, CEO and co-founder of Pendo, to present. Todd wrote the book on product-led organization and talked about that experience. And I think it's just so interesting. And as you talk about comp and you talk about metrics with the SEs, is understanding how we can make sure that this role is fairly compensated. It's plugged into the go-to-market and sales motion effectively that allows it to reach its true potential, right? Because put individual SEs on a team quota, but give them that accelerator option. If somebody in their territory hits their quota, give them something extra, right? So that they feel contributing and it feels a little bit more even than the way it does today. And so I'm totally with you on this product-led movement, really trying to keep my pulse on it and see what it means for pre-sales professionals.
Spot on. The more we value our pre-sales engineers, the more we can bring them into the fold, create a team quota, give them accelerators, the more we're going to get out of them, number one. I think the other thing is that's an important call out here is the simple fact that I think a lot of people don't know about the endless hours that pre-sales engineers spend behind the scenes, collaborating on projects, understanding parts of the platform, building, custom demos and workflows and things that like as the AE, you're not paying attention to because you're dealing with those 500 interactions right across this company. And you don't realize how much effort is being put on behind the scenes to make this demo perfect.
That's one of the things that I continue to think about and go back and forth on. Through my pre-sales career, I've tend to make my SEs track their time and track their hours because some people are like, stop doing that. Don't give the admin cost. But if someone just spent 6 hours building a custom demo environment, we should probably reflect that in the activity logs to understand what our actual hours to conversion are. There's a lot of debate on that specifically. So it is interesting to see. And Doug, I want to get your perspective on something else right now. You've talked about 2021 being the year of the pre-sales professional, and we are starting to see a lot of tools enter this space or a lot of products for pre-sales professionals. My research shows $316 million has been invested into pre-sales related tools over the last 15 months. So it's a hefty amount compared to what it was previously. So what's your thought on tools that are coming on to this space?
I'm glad you asked because we have a point of view about that. We have been tracking the space for a while. We spoke to the Vivint folks. We tracking my friends over at Hub. If it's in the pre-sale space, we care about it because at the end of the day, we think this is a really important audience that has a huge impact on the companies that they serve. And so how do they get supported today is the first question I always have to ask. So we know it's a huge audience. It's a very targeted audience. And you know what happens today? Everyone builds custom objects in Salesforce. They custom build their own kind of solution that allows them to pull data out of Salesforce, allows them to do stuff like they can track their own activities and they can give themselves value. And guess what? Who cares about that? The pre-sales leadership. The reality is there needs to be better integration in between what a pre-sales is doing and what an AE is doing. And that visibility needs to go all the way up to the CRO. If you really want to elevate the comp level for a pre-sales engineer, the visibility needs to not just be at the CRO, but it also needs to be at the board level. When they're having the celebration conversations about like, we crushed our number this quarter, we crushed our number this year. Well, guess what? It's because our SDRs did an amazing job of developing this pipeline. Our AEs did an amazing job of managing and navigating these incredible opportunities. And our pre-sales engineers did an unbelievable job of building all these custom demos and handling the technical requirements that are necessary to get these deals done. So that's the level of conversation that needs to be happening at the board level when everyone's celebrating the performance that the company did. And so as a result of the fact that the SDRs had also their time in the spotlight too, as well, I'd say probably a little further back. But whenever an audience gets their time in the spotlight, technology gets dumped into that audience, right? It's like, oh, what problems can we help them solve with technology? It happened with the SDRs. It happened with sales enablement. It's happening with RevOps. It's happening right now with pre-sales. So we're just scratching the surface of what's going to come out for pre-sales engineers. We just have to be really careful that we're not creating solutions just specifically for this audience. It's not integrated in the entire ecosystem of what the go-to-market tech stack looks like. Because I think that there's certainly some risk there to isolate them. And then guess what? There's no value for anybody other than a pre-sales person.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the risk essentially is that pre-sales tools that end up being just for pre-sales people and don't give visibility outside the go-to-market organization, essentially point solutions, are not going to be able to make a big enough impact to support this profession.
100%. Any niche tool that you have out there, whether that's for an SDR, like Lean Data and my friends at Chili Piper, I love them both. By the way, they're incredible tools. Buy them, use them. But they've got a very specific use case, right, for the SDR. And guess what? The CRO doesn't care. I mean, they care because they want contact data and better leads and higher conversion rates, et cetera. So they point at that as being like, oh yeah, this is a game changer in terms of helping us to get to our number. Now, of course, my friends at Lean Data and Chili Piper will probably disagree with me, but at the end of the day, it's niche-y, right? And people on the board level don't really pay that much attention to it. So if pre-sales really wants a seat at the strategic table, whatever's being built for them needs to help them provide that level of visibility all the way up to the board level.
Would you say that the evolution of tools in this space needs to make sure that there's carryover into sales and CS to really make sure that it provides enough value?
1,000%. So it needs to solve for the pre-sales challenges, and they are specific and they're difficult. All those custom objects that you built in Salesforce, guess what? Pre-sales leader is not just going to rip those out because you've got this new fancy platform, right? Because if it's specifically just for pre-sales, the single hardest thing that we all have to deal with, and this is even true in pre-sales, all of us in the go-to-market world have to deal with change. And getting our prospects to get comfortable with change of behavior is really difficult. In the world of pre-sales, it's equally as difficult. If I built a platform just for pre-sales engineers, I got to get them to overcome these custom objects that they put all this blood, sweat, and tears into to use this new platform. That's one challenge on its own. But if that platform itself is not integrated to sales, to CS, if it doesn't fit in with the whole go-to-market tech stack and data flow, well, then who's supporting it? It could very well end up being just another tool that could potentially die down the road once Salesforce builds something like this into their platform already.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up to get your perspective on, because some of my concern with some of the tools in the space is the economic buyer being the pre-sales professional. We don't always have the best technology budgets for pre-sales. And sometimes those have to go through VPs of sales. They have to go through the CRO. And it's harder for our persona to justify that because we're not used to it. We're not used to it like the VP of sales is or the VP of marketing. And so that's something that I've been trying to understand. Will it play a role or have an effect on how successful tools are in this market?
It's a really smart point because pre-sales leaders, they got to go fight for budget from the VP of sales or the CRO, and they need to build their own business case. And that's a great opportunity, by the way, for if you're in pre-sales to get better at is building your own business case for why you should, what's the appropriate level of tech spend per head on a pre-sales engineer. I know what it is for SDRs. I know what it is for AEs. Heck, I even know what it is for CSMs. I don't know actually what it is for pre-sales engineer. So that's a great little exercise for all you out there is like, what is that? How much should we be budgeting per head for technology for pre-sales? Once we get better at that and we can identify that, then that needs to be part of the VP of sales narrative when they're going to fight for budget. But we're not quite there yet because I think the other thing is sales leaders also need to understand why pre-sales engineers need technology, need different applications than what they're already buying for everyone else. I do everyone else in air quotes, right? Because it's like, well, that means that, they fit under the sales engagement platform, the CI, the conversation intelligence platform, the content management platform. Of course, they all get licenses to all of that, but do they always need that? No, they need something that's slightly different. But we need to do more about talking about it, what those needs are, and talking about ways in which they've been resolved or glued together in the past. And then honestly, we need new products out there that kind of support it.
This is actually something we're doing with the Pre-Sales Leadership Collective in partnership with 2Win is bringing that idea of executive conversations to our leadership group. How do we coach and train them to have those executive conversations? Because too many times we're justifying our headcount. We're justifying our existence. And this profession's been around far too long to continue to have these conversations. And I think these are things that we want to do with PreSales Collective. And I bring that up because one of the things you said about is the CRO. So I want your advice for pre-sales leaders that are out there that are still somewhat justifying their existence. So they're VPs of sales or CROs. How do they get better at those conversations to prove their value and prove their worth?
It's always a slippery slope because part of what you're asking your audience to do is change. They're technical, nerdy pre-sales engineer. You love getting into the technology and solving problems, again, solving really hard problems. But having an executive conversation, oof, that makes me nervous. Well, guess what? You got to get over yourself. So you got to learn how to have real business conversations. I love the idea you're bringing into when to do executive conversations because that's a skill. Having an executive level conversation is a skill. Understanding what they care about, how to align that is an actual skill. It's what AEs are taught to do. Guess what? Pre-sales, if you want to elevate yourself, you need to get better at your presentation skills, your communication skills, your written skills, and you got the tech chops. How do we build kind of what I'm going to call you mentioned before, like, they're the charismatic element of what a sales professional kind of has. Doesn't mean you don't have it. It's just you need to polish it and work on it so you can set yourself up to have those conversations with confidence, right? With your VP of sales or your CRO. And that's really what it boils down to is confidence and understanding and truly knowing the value that you bring to the table and that your team delivers on a daily basis.
I appreciate that. I was actually speaking with an executive at a pretty big company, pre-sales executive. I'll let this person be nameless for this comment, but told me believes that the pre-sales profession is where it is because a lot of times we're just techie. We are the tech focus. We weren't having the business conversation. And as sales evolved, as the CROs evolved, pre-sales just kind of took a little bit of a back seat. And now here we are trying to get our seat at the table. And we have put ourselves in the situation and we have to dig ourselves out. And I was actually pretty surprised to hear this person say that, knowing that their position within an organization, but it made so much sense to me.
It's true. Every pre-sales leader that I know, they're not typically the person that's going to be the loudest one in the room or the biggest voice, or that's going to come to the table with this like well thought out business analysis. And pre-sales engineers tend to be like, we'll sit back and be a little quieter and we'll just dig into the technology. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'll tell you, here's a great example of someone who's a pre-sales engineer, is an engineer. In fact, I got two examples for you of people that I admire who have an engineering background and mindset, but then applied that engineering mentality to a sales domain and then in turn became wildly successful. Because I'll tell you what, the best AEs in the world are the combination of someone who's got a pre-sales brain and kind of the AE, I don't know what you want to call it, like the sales confidence, if you will. So Mark Roberge from HubSpot. If you don't know Mark Roberge, check him out. He wrote a book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. He was an engineer from MIT and was the first hire at HubSpot. And they said, go build a sales organization. And he took him from nothing to IPO and eventually left. And now he's a general partner at his own VC firm. Because he had the engineering mindset, but then also kind of the personality, if you will, to marry the two. And he's been incredibly successful. And he's just a great dude, but he's also a total geek, kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. And then there's another gentleman by the name of Dave DeWalt. Dave DeWalt was an engineer who became a VP of sales at a tiny little startup that I was at. And we were selling vaporware. The product didn't even actually exist. And we ended up getting acquired by another company. And he worked his way up. And ultimately, he was CEO of Documentum. He was CEO of FireEye. I mean, the dude has been just insanely successful, especially in the security space, because he could talk to a CIO the same way he could talk to a VP of sales, the same way he could talk to a CMO. No problem. Super powerful.
Doug, I really appreciate your perspective today. And I appreciate you joining us on the podcast. I got to ask, is there any parting words that you have for the pre-sales profession or the future of this role?
It's your time to shine. Step out into the light and own who you are and what you do and the value you bring to every interaction you have with your customers and prospects. Own that. Partner with your AEs and walk out into like the promised land together, because I think this is your opportunity to showcase how amazing and badass you are. And you know what? Honestly, it's your opportunity to create that level of equality that I believe should exist across the entire go-to-market org.
Doug Landis, thanks for joining the PreSales Podcast. Really appreciate your time, appreciate your perspective, and appreciate you being an ally to our profession.
Appreciate it, James.
All right, PreSales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Really great hearing Doug's perspective on the role of pre-sales. As someone who comes from revenue acceleration or productivity or enablement, all the way to the venture space, pre-sales is now getting the attention it deserves in the go-to-market motion. One of the things that Doug mentioned early is he was the chief storyteller at Box. And one of the things that they realized is that their message was all over the place. And we talked about the word imagine. Being able to tell a story and have somebody imagine how different their life could be or better their life could be utilizing your software product is what some of the best pre-sales professionals do. And now is the time for pre-sales. I'm very happy to hear Doug say that 2021 is the year of the pre-sales professional and that we're almost the sleeping giant of the go-to-market organization. And so what can we continue to do to get the strategic seat at the executive table and really be that true co-partner in the go-to-market organization, continuing to up-level sales, continue to put out metrics and standards for how this role is evaluated within the go-to-market organization so that no longer are we justifying the existence of pre-sales, but there are blueprints and frameworks out there that we can continue to use to implement into our organizations. One of the things that Doug mentioned was product-led growth and how he believes it's going to change sales and pre-sales forever. And I couldn't agree more because it's such a trend that we need to keep a pulse on because it really might change the amount of work that a pre-sale professional does in the pre-sales process. And so what product-led growth will do and will mean for the pre-sales profession is a trend we should all keep an eye on. All right, PreSales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, please like and share the podcast. If you have any feedback, reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week.